Welcome back to the Chasing Common Ground podcast. I want to give this episode a little bit of an extra intro because I'm bringing my dad onto the show, and I wanted to first kind of do a little bit of a tribute just to a lot of my friends who might not have their dad around. Something unique about my parents is both of their dads died when my parents were just young. And so for my dad, he's going through a lot of things and kind of like paving his own path because he didn't have a dad around during the years when sometimes you need a dad. And I have a lot of friends who an episode like this could really suck to listen to because maybe they miss their male role model. So I just want to say, as I'm putting together something like this, I'm thinking about people like that. I'm thinking about what it would have been like for my dad to be 32 years old and kind of like finding his way through life, because he shares a lot of stuff when he's at that age. So I'm very grateful to have my parents around to teach me lots of life lessons and to set a good example for me. And it's something that I've placed a lot of importance on during my career, during the entire course of which you've heard this podcast. It's been a reoccurring theme. It's something that I like to promote to other people in the sense that whoever is your support network, make time for them, make sure that they know that you care, whether it be an uncle, whether it be a grandfather, whether it be a grandma, a friend, whoever it is that's in your life that's important to you. Spend time with them, tell them how much they matter, and learn from them. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Well, welcome back to the Chasing Common Ground podcast. I brought to you a long-awaited guest, my dad. And the reason that I thought it'd be a good idea is I actually wanted to kind of like tie in the topic of just the environment in which you live in and sort of legacy projects, things that people take on throughout the course of their life because it has a greater meaning to it. And I thought about talking about what my dad has worked on for a long time, but then I thought his words would probably be a lot more straightforward and the listeners and viewers would learn more. So, Dad, if you would, we're going to need you to introduce yourself, your background, how you got to where you are. So take it away.
Okay. Well, in about grade 8, I think I was going through one of those career fairs, and they had a little poster on, I think it was grazing reserve managers in western central Alberta. And I thought, oh, I'd like to be one of those guys because I like working with cattle and being in the environment and so on. And I was a farm kid. So it turned out after going to university, taking range management and forestry, and I managed to get a job with the government. And sure enough, I wound up being the supervisor of West Central Alberta grazing reserves by the time I was 26 years old. And that worked out pretty nicely, except for that when we were just in the process of setting up our own little house on the prairie, they asked us to move to Drayton Valley, and that wasn't going to work out too well because my family is important, and both my wife and I were very much wanting to stay close to our parents because they needed a little backup. So we decided, instead of going on as my grazing reserve supervisor dream job, I went into education. And after 1 year at the University of Alberta, ta-da, I was a teacher. Not the easiest thing to do because I was still thinking like a forester. But anyways, started out working at a school in on the Muskogee. It used to be called the Ermineskin. Well, it was the 4-band reserves anyways, at Muskogee. And I started out there working with a bunch of kids that were all, I guess they were all 16 years old, but they were kind of in grade 7, 8, and 9. And we instead of taking the regular science and social studies and math classes, sometimes we did a little different. We invented our own class, and we started a little business, and we made lunches for the students at school, and we made chili and hamburgers and what else was it? Pizza, and the students bought the groceries and they did the cooking and they sold it, and we had one guy advertising. What we did was just before lunchtime, one of my best students would take a little piece of pizza down the hallway so everybody could smell it, and then when the bell rang, it kind of stimulated the interest. So, anyways, it worked out not too bad. A lot of those people still remember when I see them. It's been 45 years, but I still meet them on the street and they say, "Yeah, I remember that. That was fun." So that's what I like to do, and I don't always follow the rules. But after a few years of teaching at Musquechies and a few other places along the way, I wound up, I kind of specialized with kids that were having problems in school. And there was an A class, a B class, a C class, and a D class. And I called it Dan's class because you don't want to be in the D class, really. And I liked working with students. They were the nicest bunch of kids I'd ever worked with. And it was a wonderful experience. And I learned a lot. And spending time with Native people, you learn to kind of take life as it comes and not worry about whether you're getting everything done all within the next few minutes. So it's a very a warm and a friendly atmosphere when you're working with a group of students that are all willing to try doing different things. We made videos. I wonder where we got that idea from, but we made videos showing what the kids were doing and showed them at the at the assemblies and so on. And eventually, after about 13 years of teaching, I was kind of in need of a break, and I went into an unusual career, I suppose, but grass seed sales. And when I was involved with the grass seed sales, that was another idea where you had to think outside the box to make it work. And over the years, well, I was there for 2 years as a grass seed salesman, and we started out, I think they were selling like $15,000 worth of grass seed, and I was getting a commission of 5% on all the sales. So you figure that out, do the math. That wasn't going to work. So I had to think of something a little different, and we got into selling grass seed to the golf courses and for the reclamation jobs, and any farmer that ever passed through the door of the store where I was working, I usually said, "You need any grass seed?" And once in a while it worked out, and we got to the point where we sold, I think it was $115,000 worth of grass seed, and that sort of helped out paying the bills. And I also learned how to work with people in Edmonton. The Pick Seed Company was selling a lot of different types of grass seed, including wildflowers and so on. And after my 2 years of working with the feed mill in Panoka selling grass seed, the Pick Seed people got to know me, and they realized that I might be able to help them out when it comes to selling grass seed. So what happened was I eventually stopped working at the feed mill and went into teaching with Olds Agricultural College at the Musquechies College, kind of a combined Musquechies College, Olds College project, which we were teaching students about agriculture. And during that time, one of my students, and I always find I get the best ideas from the students, one of the students said, "Why don't we try planting shelter belt trees on these guys' places where, they've got a house out in the middle of nowhere with no trees around it, So in the wintertime, it's cold, and in the summertime, it's hot. And so we decided, yeah, that's a heck of an idea. So we ordered a whole bunch of trees from the tree nursery in Indian Head, Saskatchewan. And we made a deal that anybody that wants trees, they can have the trees for nothing, but it's going to cost you $1 a tree for us to plant them. So all the students in the class got together, and I brought my rototiller down there, and we started rototilling and planting trees, and the money that we made went towards the college as a help in fundraising. And we wound up, I think we made $2,000 or $3,000 anyways, just planting these trees. And after a while, we got the idea of maybe people like Saskatoons. So we ordered Saskatoons from the Saskatoon farm. And if you buy enough Saskatoons, you can get kind of a good deal, where it was only costing us $1 a little plant for Saskatoons, because we were buying 1,000 of them. And then when we sold them 3 or 4 at a time, and we sold them for $4 each. So we made another nice amount of money. And when we advertised, I remember one time we put an advertised on Hawk Radio, which is really a popular radio station in Muscatine. We said, anybody like Saskatoon pie? And there's a couple of guys out on the road there heard the ad, and I said, the Saskatoon pie, you know, it's a nice kind of a thing to have. And we're right at the Samson Mall. So one of the fellows came rushing over there about 10-15 minutes later, and he says, where's the Saskatoon pie? And I said, well, actually, you got to wait a while. We're selling the Saskatoons here. And then when you grow them, you can have your own Saskatoon pie. I don't know. He took it pretty well, and we sold a few more. But I think the sense of humor, when working with Native people, in my experience, you got a great sense of humor, and I very seldom find that backfire on me. But anyways, to make a long story even longer, I don't know where Chris gets it from, but anyways, we did eventually decide it was a better idea, rather than planting these tiny little trees in people's yards and then people forgetting about it and they run over them or burn them or something happens and they don't live. Well, we decided, why don't we start tree nurseries? And when you're doing something like that, you have to find a person that's interested in having a tree nursery. So we found three different people that said it would be all right if we put a tree nursery on their place, and we paid them rent for it, and we got a grant from the Canadian Forestry Service to do some of the work, and we made tree nurseries. And we had these tree nurseries, so we grew the trees up to about 2 or 3 feet, maybe after a couple of years. And so when you're planting them, you could actually see the tree, and there was no need to run over them accidentally or anything. And that was a pretty good success, because when you drive through Muscatine, now you can see quite a few trees that are about 40 years old, and they're good-sized trees, and it was all because of that tree nursery. And even today, if I go down to Muscatine, somebody will yell at me. If I get out of the car and walk across the parking lot, they'll say, "You still selling trees?" And okay, well, you want some? And they can come out. We got them at our place. But anyway, it was a fun career. I've done all kinds of things. Actually, I think 21 different jobs in my life, but couldn't hold a job, I guess. But it's after you retire, like I could skip over some of this stuff. When we retired, we're now living on our own little parcel of land, and we're kind of following our philosophy that if you want to create an environment that is friendly for wildlife and it fits in with your lifestyle and it makes economic sense, then that's your guidelines. So what we're doing is we've got our own little farm, and we've set aside land for wildlife. We've dug a dugout that creates water habitat for waterfowl and muskrats and mosquitoes and everything. And we've got a little trail through the woods that we walk on every day. It kind of keeps us in shape because we have a nice place to go for a walk, and by the time you're done going for the walk, you feel like, we got it all right here. It's not bad. And it's a real, I don't know, it's a really positive feeling to go out at about 6 o'clock in the morning and you can hear the birds singing and you're walking through the grass or through the trees, and you go out to where the cows are grazing and they're perfectly happy, and we graze them kind of like the buffalo used to be grazed. We graze them one little piece at a time, like a rotational grazing system where they'll kind of graze the grass off and then allow it to recover again in time for a second round later in the year. But everything you do has to be kind of work in with our plan of holistic resource management. And that holistic resource management, that's when you consider everything, not just how much money you're making, but whether or not you're looking after the land properly, and whether your lifestyle is the way you want it to be, and if it fits in with your overall goals, then you got something to aim for. So I don't know, I can't really trade this for anything, and the reason why we've got to where we've got so far, I think, is because we just are willing to keep trying no matter what happens. We don't, like, because whatever, if the well goes dry, or if our teaching job ends, or if whatever happens, you just keep thinking, well, what can I do to make a go of it? And you just change what you're doing and adapt to the world as it's changing. Right now, it's a little hard to keep adapting because there's so many different technologies that are changing so fast that it's really a challenge. So we rely on other people to. That's the other thing you can do is, if you don't know how to do something, you get to find somebody that does know and make use of them in helping you to get where you're trying to go. There's no harm in that. And I don't know, it's a fun life, and we try to stay active, because if you're sitting watching TV all the time, that really isn't going to help. You kind of forget what movies you've watched, and you can't remember, even when you go to bed at night, you can't remember, well, what did we just finish watching? So we'd much rather be out doing things and working in the garden. And my wife and I go every week, all year round practically. We just go for a little drive or a walk, and she's got a camera, and I just drive and eat donuts, and no, not donuts, cinnamon buns, and and other food, and she takes the pictures, and it works out good. Like, we've got, I don't know, probably 500 or 600 pictures of birds and wildlife. And if we see, like today, we're going to go on a drive about 60 or 70 kilometers down to the Open Creek Dam near Rimbey, because we're pretty sure there's otters in that Open Creek Dam, and we've never seen an otter. So I'm like excited. This is going to be really neat. We're going to go down and see if we can find some otters about 6 or 7 o'clock tonight, and maybe we'll get Chris to come with us, and he can take
You might get
pictures.
to see it. You might get some documentation.
Yeah, we're going to see if we can find these otters. But to me, that's exciting. I don't know if anybody else gets excited about that. But
I'm pretty fired up.
yeah. So anyways, I'll quit rambling on. I've probably bored everybody to death by now. But
Well, I mean, do you think we should take the people through the trees for a walk? They're going to be able to see all the stuff, whether
okay.
they're watching on YouTube.
Yeah, well, no, we can do a little sample walk here.
Yeah, we'll do a sample walk.
Oh, and here's some logs we've got
Some good old logs for
Yeah.
firewood.
Well, actually, Chris helps me move a lot of these things.
So let's talk about like what are the things that stand out to you when you're walking through the trees? Like what are the things that you're paying attention to and thinking about as you're seeing trees dying or as you're hearing about wildfires and Jasper and stuff like that? Like there's a lot at play and there's a lot of reasons a person might go for a walk through the trees, but what's your philosophy?
Well, I think the aspect that I like looking at is like when people go for a walk, they very seldom look really careful and listen very careful. They're just going for a walk. Whereas you can go for a walk and look down, and you'll see like there's probably 20 different species of plants in a 1 square foot here. And we just label some of them, but like the fact that there's such a variety of things, where you compare this to, say, a field of canola or barley, there's lots of living things in this little 6 acres of trees we have, compared to 6 acres of anything else that's just a monoculture. So I feel good that when we walk through here, I'm always looking for how many different species there are and what is that? Oh, that's bracted honeysuckle. And then there's northern bedstraw. There's all kinds of raspberries. And we just, when we go through here, you're checking to see if something is in bloom yet, and at the same time you're listening. And get the picture here and there. Bench building isn't that great, but it works.
Did you manage to fix the spot in the walkway?
Yeah.
Nicely done. I'll share some before and after pictures of what happened here to anybody watching on YouTube. But it's like there's a lot of maintenance that comes with a space like this. What are your thoughts? Like we talked about how you've had to bounce back from different situations within your career or pivot and stuff. How does that relate to a forest? Like forests have to bounce back and adapt to all the changes and stuff. So,
well, I think like a forest, there's a multitude of species here. If it happens that it's a little too wet, then the wet species come to the fore. And if it's too dry, then like if you've got a variety of things, the chances are it's going to be at least reasonably good conditions for some plants, and especially when we're talking about the dry climate that we're experiencing. And if you've got a forest, the forest is actually taking water from way down below the surface, and through evapotranspiration, that water gets recycled into the atmosphere, which actually then provides the opportunity for a rain cloud to develop. Now, unfortunately, in some parts of Alberta and Western Canada, where we've cleared off a lot of the forests, that water cycle's kind of been messed up, and so the water basically, that is the evapotranspiration that comes out of a grain field or even a field where there's completely cultivated, that is going to be a very small percentage of the moisture going back into the atmosphere as compared to a forest that's bringing water up from basically the water table below the surface. And the more clearing we do of land, that's going to accentuate our climate change, whether it's caused by man or by some other phenomenon. Clearing the trees off is not likely going to be a good idea as far as I'm concerned. And I forget what the question was.
well, you're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'm also kind of curious, like, forests will have kind of like their natural life cycle in which, like,
Oh yeah.
after a wildfire or something that can be a very beneficial thing
Yeah.
to a forest. So, I've never been able to explain it very well, so
Okay.
that's why I needed your help.
Yeah, well, like in Jasper, for example, they had these forest fires. Well, all the people in Jasper, they were all extremely aware of the fact that it was an old decadent forest because there has been no fires allowed anywhere near the Jasper town site for the last 100 years or more. So the conditions for a fire were ideal. There was lots of dead stuff on the ground, and probably the trees were dry and lots of dead trees with that pine beetle infestation. So the conditions were perfect for a forest fire. It was a very natural thing to happen, and it's just unfortunate that that it had to burn the town site. That's the real catastrophe. That they were already doing prescribed fires, trying to prevent this from happening, but they didn't manage to keep up with the way things were changing rapidly in terms of the risk of having a wildfire. It got to the point where any wildfire was going to cause this problem, and unfortunately that's what happened. In our case here, this is a kind of a poplar with spruce growing underneath, and then it eventually cracks through. Like, we have an area where it's a bunch of old dead poplar trees, practically they're very old, and then underneath we've got spruce trees coming in, and that's a natural succession. The spruce trees would normally come in after the poplar, and then eventually you'd have more of a spruce forest and less of a poplar forest. So that would happen, and long ago, when the First Nations people were basically the only people living here, they would burn off a lot of their grasslands were burned off almost on an annual basis to encourage wildlife to come into the area. And so the grasslands maintained themselves through fire, and then bison grazing kept the trees from expanding. So in the last 100 years, there was an expansion of trees in some of the areas, like the places around the Blackfoot Grazing Reserve and the Elk Island Park and those places. The trees have definitely moved in since there's been no fires. And that is another natural ecological process. And I think fire plays a role in maintaining the ecosystem. It's just the fire has to come before the trees are the fire unfortunately didn't come through Jasper until it became a major disaster. And in the past, the fires would burn, probably every 10 or 15 years, there would have been a fire in Jasper that kind of rejuvenated the forest. But the fact that there wasn't any fires for 100 years, it was talking about an old forest, which is a very high-risk forest when it comes to forest fires.
So to pivot us to our next topic here as we're walking through the forest, I've always reframed situations when there's something stressful, like a forest fire could be a stressful thing, or even just all of the business closures and stuff during the pandemic, that can be a stressful thing. But the way I reframe it is I think about other times, maybe before I was around, where similar things happened, and it would feel like the end of the world in that moment. But then if you've lived a long enough life, you've had those situations happen, you're like, oh, it'll be fine. Like, it's just kind of like focus on the basics, focus on the essentials, take care of yourself, and we'll get through this. Has there ever been a time in like your younger years, like 30s, 40s, 20s, that felt similar to these past 4 years?
There has been times, like, I can remember when it was so dry before. It's a cycle. It's definitely a cycle. It's just, I don't remember any time when we've had such a worldwide concern with forest fires and flooding and major disasters. Like, I don't think it's just because of the news or anything. It's because there is more energy in the atmosphere that is causing this higher level of environmental disasters. So this is the first time in my life I can remember worldwide problems like this.
What would be your advice to listeners who they allow that to be their main focus in their day to day and they're like, oh no, everything is doomed? People who struggle to be optimistic, what's your advice for them?
Oh, yes. I'd say if you are concerned about it, then maybe take an active role in maybe a type of an environmental organization that kind of agrees with your philosophy. If you are in fact concerned about the environment, then join the Canadian, I think it's the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and or the Nature Conservancy, or any of those types of organizations that are actually trying to conserve the environment in a positive way. I would think you would find that to be helpful if you don't need to be tying yourself to a tree, but just to be doing something positive with your life. It helps you to feel good about yourself. And I know I belong to an organization called Alice, and they're encouraging farmers to set aside wetlands and plant trees and do the right thing. And I feel good about it. Like, I think it's a positive thing. So we don't go out on the highway and have placards or anything, but we do talk to individuals and try and encourage people. We don't tell people what they should be doing. We just encourage people that are wanting to do the right thing in terms of looking after their land in the long range. So that would be my advice.
I like it. I mean, just people taking initiative with what seems to be causing trouble makes a big difference. A person might think that what they do wouldn't matter, but as you talked about with selling trees and stuff, and how now it's kind of part of your legacy as you go into Musqueam and people can recognize you still, and they might still be asking if you've got trees for sale. Like, that would have an impact on other people, and the trees that may have been planted that still are growing, like some of the trees we've planted here when I was a kid, all that stuff compounds with time. But we're going to wrap up this episode. I would like to thank you, Dad, for joining me on the Chasing Common Ground podcast. I don't have to worry about what I say on this episode because you're in it. Usually, if I'm recording, I'm like, I got to make sure I don't say anything that Dad wouldn't like. But you're here, so we're good. But thanks again. And for anybody that is listening, check out the version of on YouTube, and you'll be able to see some of the footage of what we're talking about. And there might be some bonus clips if you are a subscriber. And if you haven't already, rate the show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe on Substack to get it directly to your email and to get video footage there too. And thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.